The Zephyrian hegemony had transformed mathematics into a religion, statistics into scripture, and probability into prophecy. For 6 millennia they had governed 14 sectors of the galaxy through what they called actuarial precision, the delightfully clinical practice of reducing all life's messy variables into neat numerical formulas that always yielded the correct administrative solution. Their motto, carved in probability equations across government buildings throughout hegemony space, read, "Mathematics never lies, variables always comply." Their latest mathematical masterpiece was the Humanitarian Resettlement Protocol, which sounded wonderfully compassionate until you realized it was essentially a probability-based method for making inconvenient populations disappear with statistical certainty. The beauty of the system lay in its mathematical elegance. Problematic species were relocated to worlds where environmental variables guaranteed extinction within calculable timeframes, leaving the hegemony's conscience mathematically clean and their administrative records technically truthful. Obsidian Reach represented the pinnacle of their problem-solving algorithms. The planet was a mathematician's dream of organized hostility, where every lethal variable had been precisely calculated and cross-referenced. Volcanic glass storms swept the surface every 47.3 hours with meteorological precision, creating atmospheric conditions that could shred organic matter down to the molecular level. The oceans consisted of liquid methane maintained at temperatures that flash froze most biological processes, while simultaneously being flammable enough to turn breathing into an explosive proposition. The gravity wells shifted unpredictably across the surface, in patterns that followed chaos theory so precisely that even the Zephyrians couldn't map them reliably. In mathematical terms, it was absolutely perfect for eliminating humans permanently. The human problem had been growing exponentially in hegemony databases for decades, following patterns that made their statistical analysts genuinely uncomfortable. Humans refused to conform to behavioral algorithms, consistently generated data points outside predicted parameters, and displayed a disturbing tendency to inspire other species towards similar statistical anomalies. Even worse, they had developed an irritating habit of asking questions that made other hegemony subjects start questioning the mathematical foundations of their governance. Arch-calculator Venth, the hegemony's chief statistical administrator, had run comprehensive probability analyses on the human situation, using 17 different computational models. Every calculation yielded the same result. Humans were fundamentally incompatible with orderly mathematical governance. The species was too unpredictable for standard probability matrices, too creative for behavioral algorithms, and too inspiring to simply ignore. The solution was mathematically elegant. Relocate them to an environment where statistical certainty guaranteed elimination, allowing the hegemony to maintain their humanitarian reputation while solving their human problem with actuarial precision. Captain Korth stood in the calculation center of the transport vessel, Statistical Certainty, reviewing the final deportation algorithms with mathematical satisfaction. Below him, 60,000 humans were being processed through disposal protocols that had been refined to 7 decimal places of efficiency. Each human had been selected through algorithmic analysis of hegemony databases, scientific researchers whose discoveries threatened established paradigms, artists whose work inspired uncomfortable thoughts, and various other individuals whose primary crime was generating unpredictable variables in otherwise stable systems. "Sir, the human cargo equations are balanced," reported Lieutenant Tiss, managing to make the word cargo sound appropriately mathematical. The Zephyrians had perfected the art of reducing other species to statistical variables, which made the necessary calculations so much cleaner. The humans themselves represented a diverse sampling of intellectual troublemakers who had made the mistake of thinking that creativity and curiosity were virtues rather than threats to mathematical order. Dr. Tobias Brennan, formerly a planetary geologist before his research into gravitational anomalies made him statistically dangerous, pressed his face against the transport bay's observation portal. Around him, 60,000 other humans processed their circumstances in typically human fashion. Some were calculating odds, others were planning contingencies, and a disturbing number were already forming committees.
"Well,"
announced Keiko Nakamura, a former atmospheric engineer whose innovations in environmental systems had made her too valuable to leave near functioning civilizations. "I've seen worse statistical projections." Her attempt at gallows humor drew nervous laughter from nearby humans, which probably wasn't the response the Zephyrians had factored into their behavioral equations. Captain Korth observed the loading process with mathematical appreciation. The humans were accepting their relocation with remarkable composure, which only proved how completely they failed to understand the statistical inevitability of their situation. Hegemony actuaries had calculated that Obsidian Reach would eliminate the human population within 4.7 standard months, assuming they could survive the initial environmental exposure long enough to appreciate the mathematical precision of their doom. The galactic insurance markets were offering slightly more generous odds, 6.2 months if the humans proved particularly resourceful about finding temporary shelter. The journey to Obsidian Reach consumed 26 standard days, during which the humans demonstrated their species' most mathematically irritating characteristic: they refused to follow predictable patterns. By day 4, they had established organizational structures that didn't conform to any leadership algorithm in hegemony databases. By day 9, they were conducting educational seminars on subjects that weren't included in their statistical profiles. By day 17, they had somehow modified the transport bay's life support systems to begin manufacturing equipment that wasn't listed in any survival probability matrix. Captain Korth found their activities simultaneously fascinating and irrelevant. It was rather like watching statistical outliers attempt to rewrite probability theory, intellectually curious, but ultimately pointless, when mathematics had already determined the outcome. The deployment operation was executed with typical Zephyrian precision. The transport vessels descended through Obsidian Reach's glass storm-saturated atmosphere just long enough to deposit the humans and their minimal supplies on terrain that had been calculated as temporarily stable. Captain Korth watched from orbit as tiny figures dispersed across the planet's razor-sharp surface, establishing what would undoubtedly be temporary structures before the environment processed them, according to mathematical projections. "Initiating departure sequence," he ordered, already calculating his efficiency report to Arch Calculator Venth. The humans were delivered, the planet would handle the elimination according to statistical models, and the hegemony could focus on more mathematically tractable problems. The entire operation had consumed precisely 7.3 hours, efficient, calculated, and documented to 12 decimal places of accuracy. What happened next would require entirely new mathematical models. The first month on Obsidian Reach was, by any statistical analysis, a comprehensive disaster that should have eliminated the human population with mathematical certainty. The glass storms arrived precisely on schedule, delivering atmospheric abuse that should have reduced organic matter to component molecules within days. The methane oceans proved to be even more hostile than hegemony calculations had projected, creating environmental conditions that made survival impossible, according to every biological algorithm in their databases. The gravity wells followed chaos patterns so precisely unpredictable that even basic movement became mathematically inadvisable. By all statistical projections, the colony should have been eliminated within 5 weeks. The hegemony calculations were computationally rigorous, the environmental variables were precisely quantified, and human biological limitations were thoroughly documented across 17 different survival matrices. What the projections hadn't accounted for was the uniquely human tendency to treat mathematical impossibility as a particularly interesting engineering challenge. Dr. Tobias Brennan established the first research facility in a volcanic tube system, using equipment salvaged from transport ships and what could only be described as applied geological stubbornness. His team began analyzing Obsidian Reach's hostile environment, discovering that the planet's glass storms followed predictable crystalline formation patterns that could be harvested rather than merely survived. "The glass storms are actually incredible opportunities," Brennan reported during the colony's first monthly survival calculation. "The atmospheric silica content is extraordinary, and the formation patterns create natural composite materials that are stronger than anything we could manufacture conventionally. If we can develop proper collection and processing systems, we might be able to turn the storms into a manufacturing resource." Keiko Nakamura, meanwhile, had taken one look at the methane oceans and reached a conclusion that would have horrified any reasonable atmospheric engineer. They represented the largest chemical processing facility in the sector. Her environmental systems background proved invaluable as she developed extraction and refinement protocols that gradually transformed the planet's most dangerous feature into an industrial asset. Methane burns clean, processes easily, and exists in practically unlimited quantities, Nakamura explained with characteristic directness. We just need to treat the entire ocean as a chemical plant instead of a death trap. Simple perspective adjustment. But truly extraordinary developments began around month 6, when the humans started succeeding at tasks that violated several established laws of statistical probability. Brennan's geological teams had somehow developed glass storm harvesting systems using the planet's own volcanic activity, creating collection networks that not only provided protection from atmospheric abuse, but converted the storms into raw materials for construction. The technology was crude by hegemony standards, but it worked with an efficiency that defied mathematical modeling. Viktor Kowalski, formerly an industrial biochemist before his research into alternative fuel systems made him statistically inconvenient, had made perhaps the most remarkable discovery. The gravity wells that should have made planetary development impossible could actually be utilized as natural industrial processes for manufacturing techniques that were impossible under standard gravitational conditions. It's like the planet is trying to kill us using the most useful methods possible, Kowalski observed during a colony council meeting. Every environmental hazard turns out to be an industrial advantage if you approach it with the right mathematical framework. The underground metropolis that emerged over the following months was an engineering achievement that impressed even its architects. Brennan's teams had discovered that Obsidian Reach's volcanic structure, while unstable, contained vast networks of natural tubes that could be expanded and reinforced using materials readily available from glass storm harvesting. Within 8 months, they had created a subterranean civilization that housed all 60,000 colonists in conditions that exceeded the comfort levels of many established hegemony worlds. By the end of their first year on Obsidian Reach, the human colony had achieved something that shattered every statistical model in hegemony databases. They had not merely survived, but had transformed their elimination protocol into economic opportunity. The glass storms that were supposed to kill them powered their growing manufacturing infrastructure. The methane oceans that should have poisoned them were providing unlimited fuel for expanding industrial operations. The gravity wells that were meant to crush them had become natural factories for producing materials that were impossible to manufacture under normal conditions. More remarkably, they had begun exporting their impossibility. The glass composites produced by their storm harvesting systems were highly sought after for advanced construction applications. The methane derivatives developed by Nakamura's teams were proving valuable for fuel systems across multiple sectors. The gravity well manufacturing techniques were being studied by hegemony engineers who couldn't quite comprehend the statistical models involved. The transformation was so mathematically impossible that when the first Zephyrian monitoring probe arrived for its scheduled confirm elimination calculation, it initially reported a fundamental error in its statistical processes. Obsidian Reach, according to the probe's sensors, was displaying industrial output levels that exceeded most established hegemony colonies, technological innovation that suggested advanced manufacturing, and population growth that indicated not just survival but active expansion. Arch Calculator Venth reviewed the probe data with growing mathematical anxiety. According to every model in the hegemony's comprehensive databases, Obsidian Reach should have been a statistically sterile wasteland by now. Instead, it was showing economic indicators that challenged established probability theory, technological development that defied environmental algorithms, and population statistics that suggested the impossible. Human success, where mathematical certainty had guaranteed failure. "Sir," reported Captain Korth during their emergency calculation session, "we may need to revise our fundamental assumptions about human statistical behavior." The Arch Calculator's response required extensive mathematical censorship before it could be included in official records. By year 2, Obsidian Reach had become something that made the Zephyrian hegemony profoundly mathematically uncomfortable. a demonstration that statistical certainty could be defeated by human unpredictability. The colony had not only survived, but had transformed their elimination protocol into the sector's most profitable manufacturing operation. The underground cities were architectural achievements that challenged hegemony engineering calculations. The environmental adaptation projects had created industrial capabilities that exceeded theoretical maximum efficiency ratings. Most disturbing, from the hegemony's perspective, Obsidian Reach had begun attracting voluntary immigrants who were specifically requesting relocation to death worlds for the economic opportunities. The success story was spreading through galactic communication networks, with exponential growth patterns that defied containment algorithms. Other subjugated species were taking notice, and some were asking mathematically uncomfortable questions about their own statistical treatment under hegemony governance. The humans had accomplished something unthinkable. They had converted their statistical elimination into mathematical liberation. The implications were staggering for hegemony authority. Word of Obsidian Reach's transformation was inspiring resistance movements that followed probability patterns the hegemony couldn't calculate. The Centauri Collective requested permission to establish diplomatic relations with the human colony. The Vegan Trade Consortium filed formal proposals for permanent commercial partnerships that couldn't be modeled using standard economic algorithms. 7 different species submitted petitions to the Galactic Commerce Board, requesting trading rights with Obsidian Reach that violated established probability matrices. Arch-calculator Venth found himself in the impossible position of explaining to the Hegemony Mathematical Council why their most statistically certain elimination protocol had become the galaxy's most attractive destination. The meeting resulted in his reassignment to a data processing station in an empty system, where he spent his remaining career attempting to calculate where the human equations had gone wrong. The hegemony's response to the Obsidian Reach situation was typically mathematical. They classified it as a statistical anomaly and attempted to exclude it from their probability models. Official records continued to list the planet as successfully processed, and any reports suggesting otherwise were filed under computational errors. The humans were never officially acknowledged as having survived their elimination protocol, which created the amusing situation where they were simultaneously eliminated according to hegemony statistics and actively negotiating trade agreements with mathematical impossibility. Dr. Tobias Brennan, now serving as Obsidian Reach's elected chief statistical officer, found the entire situation endlessly entertaining. The planet that was designed to eliminate them had become their greatest economic achievement. The elimination protocol that was intended to solve the human problem had freed humanity from hegemony statistical control entirely. The mathematical certainty that should have been their end had become their mathematical independence. "You know," he mentioned during a governing council meeting while reviewing trade proposals from 31 different species, "I think we should send the hegemony a statistical analysis of how their solution worked out." Viktor Kowalski, now managing the most profitable gravity well manufacturing operation in 4 sectors, nodded thoughtfully. "Maybe we should offer to help them with their other population problems. We've gotten pretty good at turning elimination protocols into economic opportunities." The laughter that followed probably registered on probability sensors throughout the underground city. 4 years after the successful statistical elimination of the human problem, Obsidian Reach had become one of the most economically influential independent worlds in the galaxy. The human population had grown to nearly 80,000 through natural increase and enthusiastic immigration from species who wanted to experience death world economics. The underground cities were technological marvels that attracted researchers and entrepreneurs from across civilized space. The surface adaptation had created manufacturing capabilities that were not only profitable but genuinely revolutionary. The Zephyrian Hegemony, meanwhile, was grappling with an entirely new mathematical crisis. Their most statistically certain elimination method had become the galaxy's most desired economic development program. Other troublesome species were actively attempting to qualify for humanitarian resettlement to human territories, hoping to replicate the Obsidian Reach mathematical miracle. The hegemony's carefully maintained reputation for actuarial precision was being undermined by their most spectacular computational failure. The humans, for their part, seemed completely oblivious to the mathematical chaos they had caused. They were too busy converting impossible worlds into profitable enterprises, transforming elimination protocols into development opportunities, and turning statistical certainty into economic uncertainty. It was the galactic community was beginning to understand simply what humans did when given the chance to rewrite the equations. The final irony was perhaps the most mathematically perfect. The Zephyrian Hegemony, in attempting to eliminate the human problem, had created the human solution. By sending them to a world where they could build without statistical oversight, they had allowed humanity to demonstrate exactly what they were capable of when freed from mathematical constraints. The example of Obsidian Reach was inspiring independence movements across the galaxy, and the hegemony's authority was beginning to crumble under the weight of its own computational contradictions. In the end, the Zephyrians had achieved exactly what they calculated. They had solved their human problem with statistical precision. They had just solved it in precisely the opposite direction their mathematics had predicted. The humans were no longer troubling the hegemony with unpredictable variables and uncomfortable statistical questions. They were too busy building a better galaxy using entirely new mathematical models. And somewhere in the thriving manufacturing districts of New Obsidian City, as the planet's glass storms sparkled like controlled fireworks over methane-powered industrial complexes, Dr. Tobias Brennan was probably still chuckling about that statistical analysis they really should send to show the hegemony exactly how their mathematical certainty had calculated out